What's up, everyone? It's Matt Mrozek, aka MVM397, and I couldn't help myself. I started working on this Stella kit. So my first figure kit ever, so I thought I'd document it. And I'm gonna, basically everything is exactly the same as I do with other resin kits. The only thing that'll be different for me is painting skin tones. So I'm just gonna go over real quick, for those of you who don't know what my steps are. The first thing I do with the resin kit is I go through and I clean it up. So I made a video last night kind of describing Stella and how cool the kit was and stuff. So I started going through and kind of marking things up where I needed some sanding work, and it looks a lot worse than it is. This kit's actually really nice. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna turn my fan off. I'm gonna turn this one off and turn this one on. So, oop, that's loud. It's like 95 degrees today, so and I work in my garage, so it's kind of warm. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of show you what I do. I go through with a Sharpie, and I mark any areas that I feel need some work. So, like I said, this looks a lot worse than it really is. But anywhere you see black Sharpies, a little rough area, maybe like this area, that little detail line got filled in a little bit, so I'll scribe it. I'm going to try to sand this area smooth, a little smoother, so hopefully I'll have less putty work. And same with this area here. Hopefully I'll be able to sand that smoother and have a little less putty work. As I mentioned in my video yesterday, the mold lines are pretty much non-existent. I did go ahead and put a Sharpie line over where I can see where the mold line should be, and I'm going to sand that out anyway. But like for instance, in the shoulder area right here, I missed it. There's a little, I think that's part of the mold line, so I'm just going to color it in. And let the Sharpie dry, because if I try to sand it right after I mark it, it just smears. So that's kind of like the first step I do, is I go through and mark everything. And I haven't marked all the pieces yet. I just kind of marked the face. I got a fingerprint here on the face. The face is actually sculpted just about perfectly, but the Sharpie was still a little wet and I got some fingerprints on it, but I'll get a light sanding anyway. The only area that really need to work on here is the headband, and I see a little discrepancy right here, so we'll draw a line on that. And this is going to get covered up by hair, but I'm going to sand it out anyway. So I already did the ship. I gave this a light sanding already, and I'm not too worried about this actually, because it's supposed to be kind of beat up. So the only thing I worried about was where the mold line kind of looked like where it was. And again, I see where there's supposed to be a mold line, and I don't feel anything. It's a little bit right here. I could probably draw a line. I'll show you what it looks like right there. So I'm not sure if this is actually going to show there's a mold line. There's a little divot right there. Let's see where else. Looks like I got that pretty much taken care of. I'm not going to worry about really any of the pits or anything that I see, unless it's real obvious, just because it's supposed to be a crash ship. So once I do that, I take a 3M super fine sanding sponges, and I love these things. I buy these by the box. You can find places where they sell them like $2, $3 a piece. I buy them by the box, they're cheaper that way. I think you get 10 to a box, maybe 10 or 15. I bought a set of these probably 8 years ago, and I've yet to use a whole set. So I cut them up into smaller pieces like this so they're easier to handle. And as they wear out, you can use them for, like, super fine is probably equivalent to about a 600 grit sandpaper. So it's perfect for doing this kind of stuff, because it's not too coarse where it's going to get rid of detail, but it's just coarse enough to where it'll get rid of the imperfections that I see. So I come up in the smaller pieces just so it's easier to work with. And you can use these wet. The one problem I do find that after you've used them wet, they don't seem to be as gritty. So I don't use them wet too often. But like, let's say you know, after a while this starts to wear down, I don't throw these away until there's absolutely like no sanding ability left. They last forever. So just to give you an instance, so like on this down spaceship part where I marked this, I'm going to go ahead and start sanding that, and you'll see if there's a mold line there. there'll be a definite line, and there's no line there. So what I was seeing, actually you can see right there and right there, that's all there was to that mold line. Very minimal, and you can see it sanded out in about less than 10 seconds. That area's done. So, you know, when you buy a good quality kit, this is what you get. You get easy prep. There's a little divot there. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm really worried about anything that looks like it's man-made, you know, like it's not supposed to be there. So you can see there where I sanded, and even though I couldn't feel the mold line, it's there. You can see the line right there. So now I have not soaked these in Purple Power yet or cleaned them that way. I know Mark, the guy who manufactures and sells these kits, he is one of the proponents of cleaning your resin first before you do anything. And his theory is that the resin is porous, and all you're doing is pushing any mold release down into the resin. I've never had any problems with that. I've only had really problems with resin one time, as far as paint, where paint would just not stick at all, and that was on the 1/100th proof custom I did a while ago, the shield. I stripped it and painted it probably 3 or 4 times, purple powered, wiped it with alcohol, wiped it with thinner. My guess is that the resin just never fully cured, and so it just kept seeping chemicals. So that's it. This ship is prepped. That's ready to clean and prime. I see a few little bubbles here, so I'm not going to worry about that till after I prime, and then see what pops up. So that's done. So let's look at the face. So now you see I got a little. I'm going to be super light with my sanding on this. I do not want to mess up this sculpt. It's so pretty. So I'm not putting any pressure down. I'm just going to give it a very light sanding. I like to do this. It gives the resin a little bit of tooth for the paint to stick to, and it just helps even anything out. So I'm not putting any pressure. I'm basically just wiping this over her face. So again, I don't want to, especially where like the eyebrows are, I do not want to sand those down. And even though there's a fingerprint right there, I'm not going to worry about getting rid of it. So just super light, just like this. Nope, not putting any pressure down. I do not want to ruin this beautiful face. And you can see I've got I'm folding my sponge like this to get it into smaller areas. And if you find that you can't get into smaller areas of the sponge, just get yourself some 400 grit or 600 grit wet dry sandpaper and fold it, and you can get to these little corners. So I'm not putting any pressure. I'm just barely wiping over this. A little bit on the nose. Again, this is just to kind of help smooth the resin out, give the paint some tooth to stick to. And I think that's all I'm going to do on the face. I think we're looking pretty good. Okay, so you see here, I got the headband all marked up, and the mold lines there is a little more obvious than on some of the other parts, so I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to go over with the sanding sponge, and you can see right there. One thing I didn't mention on these parts is there's no gates, so I don't know if they snipped them off for you and sanded them out, but there's no gates. My guess is that's where the gate was, and they took it off, and they smoothed it out for us a little bit, which is a nice bonus as a builder. So we're going to go over this, and since this is a headband and it's a flat piece, I'm going to go back over with my X-Acto blade, and I'm going to scrape this flat. And my camera's shaking, I apologize, it's because it's clamped to my work light, so you can get a straight down view, because I'm not, again, my videos aren't the greatest, I don't think. I need a better setup to do them properly, so you guys can see what I'm doing. And I hope you guys can see this, because I can't see through my video camera when I'm taping. So who knows? This may turn out, it may not turn out. So again, as I'm sanding, you can see where the discrepancies are in the resin. So This is where a good sharp X-Acto blade comes in on a flat piece, because you can just come in here and you can just scrape over it like this. And I'm not really putting any pressure. This works great on flat areas. I do this all the time on my Gundams, on mobile suits, because there's a lot of angled areas. And since this is flat, I'm not too worried about. There's no detail that I'm getting. I'm scraping away. So I'm going to do this just to get rid of the major discrepancies. And I can see a couple bubbles just popped out. No big deal. So the bubbles, we'll see how the primer does on them. If the primer doesn't fill, then we'll put a little spot putty on it after the first round of primer. So we're going to scrape that. And again, I'm barely putting any pressure. I'm letting the blade do all the work. And this is a brand new blade. This does not work as well if you have a dull blade. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm doing my best to avoid, I don't want to hit the hair, because I don't want to scrape that away. So we're going to get this till most of the black is gone. If any of you have ever painted cars, I used to paint cars for a living. This is what we would call the guide coat, the black. So in painting cars, you would you do your body work, you'd put your primer down, and on top of the primer, you would give it a very light dusting of a flat black spray paint. You can use spray paint. They make something called dull coat, but you're just paying extra money for it. And what it does is it does exactly this. Because as you're sanding, all your little discrepancies start to pop out. The black remains in any low areas, any pits, any seams, any deep sanding scratches. And the idea is you sand it until all the guide coat is gone. And once the guide coat is gone, you know your part is nice and flat. So far, the pieces I've looked at, this little area right here has required the most work, and it's not that much. So we're going to come in here, and this may require me to get out a slightly coarser sandpaper and then finish it up with the sanding sponge, but this is working. It's getting there. You don't want to hurry this stuff too much, because you could do more damage to the piece than good. And I hope I'm in frame. But you can see here, so you can see some bubbles popped out there. And I'm not going to worry about those right now. So we're getting there. Yeah, I'm not hitting the hair. Don't want to sand the hair. And as we go a little further, we get a new sponge. If you find that your sponge is not sanding as well, it's just clogged with debris. So get a new piece, or what you can do with this is you can just kind of flick it like this, and the dust will go away, and you'll have a better sanding sponge. So, and I'm using my old video camera, since my Logitech C920 does not want to record in high definition on my Mac. Kind of pissed about that. It works great for chats, I just can't record high def. And I was looking at the videos I did last night, I was really not happy with them. Unfortunately, it didn't do these kits justice that I unboxed and showed you guys. You couldn't see the details, they weren't sharp. So I'm just going to use my old Play Sport. It does a fine job. So that's all I'm going to do on this. For the most part, the black's gone. Got a few little bubbles that kind of popped up there, and I got a little. I'm going to sand this spot down just a little bit more. See if I can get rid of that, because that's visible. I don't think that's covered up by any hair. Right, we're going to get in there, and then there's a little seam line right here on the neck. Get rid of that. Now, on a round spot like this, you do not want to use your razor blade, because it will flatten it out. So it will take a little bit longer to sand it, but you won't be flattening out a rounded area. And I'm sanding this trying to avoid her jawline, because it's pretty well defined, and I don't want to sand that down. So I'm coming here, and slowly but surely it will go away. I hope this is in view of the camera. No clue. And slowly but surely we'll get there. And that black will be gone. And then I know that area is ready to be primed. One little speck right there is bugging me, so we're going to go ahead and keep going until it's gone. Don't want to see a straight line of black, because that shows you that your mold line is still there. So that looks pretty good. And primer should take care of the rest of that. Now this area right here, this will be covered by hair, but I'm going to go ahead and sand it out just to be safe. And you can tell that there wasn't a whole lot of care taken with the molding here, because this is all covered up. So this is kind of, it's rough. I mean, this is a rough part of the sculpture. But again, it's covered by the hair, so it's no big deal. But I'm going to sand it out anyway, just to be safe. Or sand most of it out at least. I think that's all I'm going to do. So that's it for the head. Looks pretty good. Head bends nice and smooth. All the black for the most part's gone. There's a couple bubbles that popped up, but primer and putty will take care of that. Alright, let's do one more piece. We'll do an easy piece. So this little guy right here, this is the thruster that goes on the back of the ship. The only discrepancy I see is really the slight seam line. And that's the only thing we're going to worry about. I'm not going to worry about if there's any little pits or anything in this, again, because it's a down spacecraft and it's gotten beat up. So just sand that down. Like so. And these sanding sponges are great for curved surfaces, because you unless you're just really mess it up, you can't flatten an area out using the sponge, because it conforms to the shape that you're sanding, and that's why I love them. So I'm actually putting quite a bit of pressure on this, because I can. It's not gonna distort the shape. So that part's gone. Get rid of this part. And just for grins, I'm even going to bring out some 600 grit sandpaper. This is 600 grit wet dry sandpaper. I also use 400 grit, but since the seam lines and everything is so minimum on this, I don't need anything lower grit than a 600. So, and then it'll just save me priming also. I don't want to. It'll keep my scratches down to a minimum. And I'm just using this dry. You can use it wet. Using it wet gives you two advantages. First, it will sand smoother, and also it cleans your sandpaper as you go, so it won't get clogged up as quickly. So using it dry, it gets clogged pretty fast. But like in an area like that where the sanding sponge doesn't seem to be cutting it, just come in here with something a little more aggressive, but still it's not going to damage anything. Another advantage of using it wet is that it keeps your dust down. So I do a big no-no. I don't sand with the mask, just because it's so freaking hot in here. I would suffocate. I'd be sweating all over the place. So if you're working with resin, it's a good idea to sand with a mask, just a dust mask, because the resin dust can be toxic. And so what I'm doing here is I'm kind of going around. I don't want to just sand this way the whole time, so I'll create a ridge right there. So I'm sanding all the way around it like this, so it's evenly sanded. And right now I'm not putting in pressure, I'm just letting the sandpaper do the work. So that's pretty much for that seam line. Let's do the same thing over here. Again, just sand all in all directions to keep it from getting a groove. Like this. And like do this little spot right here. And then we'll just finish this piece up, and that'll be it for this first part of the Stella build. I'll go through all the pieces and I'll do this process. And then once I'm satisfied that I've gotten as much of the discrepancies taken care of that I can see, the next step will be to soak the parts in purple power for 24 hours or so. And then I'll go back over them with some soapy water and a toothbrush to get all that out. And then any pieces that fit in my ultrasonic cleaner that are small enough, I'll throw in there with just some soapy water to kind of give them a good rinse. So that's pretty good. And then we're just going to take care of the seam lines on top of this detail. And that should go pretty quick because the seam line's very minimal. You can see there where the seam line is, right there. And a couple seconds of sanding, and it's gone. So now what I'll do is I'll just hit the whole part very lightly with this super fine sanding sponge. Again, it just helps smooth the resin out, gives the paint a little more tooth to bite to. Really the primer, because that's what's going to go down, but tooth is basically a scratch, you know, a little. Tends to adhere a little better if it's roughed up just a little bit rather than perfectly smooth, because you're creating a mechanical bond rather than a chemical bond. Chemical bond's always better, but if you can get both, you're pretty much guaranteed not to have any lifting. Chemical bond is like when when the primer or the paint melts into the surface and they become one entity. It's kind of like welding. When you weld two pieces of metal, those two pieces of metal at the end become one piece of metal. A chemical bond does the same thing. A mechanical bond is simply like the paint gripping to the surface. Chemical is always better because it becomes one unit. But if you can kind of achieve achieve both, then you're good to go. So that piece right there is all prepped, ready for a coat of primer. So I'll do it for the Stella build. For the first part, I'm going to go through and mark up all these pieces and start cleaning them up and getting them prepped for primer. And step 2 will be, I'll just show you how I clean the pieces, and then we'll go from there. Thanks for watching, as always. Mrozek, aka MVM397, signing out. Catch you guys later.